Good morning, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp. We are running late today, but a show on tap. Our first time in a little while to get a chance to talk to Terrence Edwards today. We get looking forward to that opportunity. Also, we are going to kind of correct a little bit some of the national media stuff. You know, we say this a lot that, hey, it's important every now and then to kind of hear the national media perspective, what they're saying about Georgia may be different than what we are. Sometimes it's interesting information, more clarity from a more wider, long-range view. Sometimes it's probably wrong. Today may be an example of the latter on that. Also, most importantly, to kick things off, new details, important information about what's next for five-star quarterback Jared Curtis, including perhaps the most important piece of information of all. Very good chance that Curtis comes to Georgia. Nothing's guaranteed now more than ever, but it is certainly interesting here today. So what do you say? Without further ado, we dive into that and get it going with you. We are glad you are with us for it. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Merriweather and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. Find them online at georgiadivorceteam.com.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I say it all the time. We are the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. And because we do a fan-oriented conversation, because after all, what other kind of conversation could you possibly have? Because we do it that way, I do notice certain things about fan behavior. And I'm a fan just like you, so perhaps at times I am a participant in this process as well. One of the things I frequently notice for those Georgia fans who historically have been involved with the ongoing recruiting discussion is there's a little bit of what I would call an emotional hedge. And it seems like there's a lot of this now because we live in an NIL age. Things change quickly. The touchy-feely part of the recruiting process seems less prevalent than it used to be. It seems like there's more justification for the kind of quote-unquote emotional hedge than maybe there used to be. But the truth is, even if you want to go back years ago to what maybe I might think, you might think of as a more traditional recruiting process, there was still a little bit of an emotional hedge when it comes to the various players and their looming decisions. Now, what do I mean when I say emotional hedge? It sort of looks like this. It's one of those things of when there are twists and turns in a recruiting process, even, years ago, you would hear the Georgia fans say, man, just wake me up when this is over. In other words, I don't want to be involved in any of this. There's too much drama, too much intrigue, too much back and forth. People have had a little bit, at least a portion of college football fans have had a little bit of a distaste for that, even before we kind of got to the NIL age. There's also this thing of, and now this does really seem to be true. In the past, people would also say, well, listen, now these commitments don't mean a thing until National Signing Day, and these guys don't know what the word commitment even means anymore. There has been some of that goes on. That the actual truth, I would say, certainly speaking for myself as a fan, is when an elite recruit is considering your school, your favorite team, it just stands to reason that, of course, you would want him. And it is, at just sort of face value, bad news, not devastating news necessarily, but bad news if a player you covet makes a choice other than your favorite school. Of course, that's bad news. And conversely, if that player chooses your school, while it doesn't guarantee future success or anything like that, it is at least good news, as much good news as you can get in the given month that it perhaps happens in. So that's the sort of backdrop for any recruiting discussion. Fans have a little bit of an emotional hedge. There's sometimes a temptation not to kind of get too deep into it because there's always the chance you end up disappointed and a little bit frustrated because sometimes these recruiting stories can work out that way. Now, the reason why I say all of that is because on Monday, the five-star quarterback Jared Curtis is going to announce his commitment. And all the stuff that I just said about emotional hedge and not getting too involved and a little cautious about, the potential for frustration or hurt. All of that's even more true now because the NIL age seems to have put those feelings on steroids, no pun, for lack of a better way of saying it, that there's just sort of an intensity around that now in a way that perhaps did not used to be there. But can we all agree whether, it's a high NIL price or, can we all agree that it would be good news? Can we all agree that it would be a reason to celebrate if five-star quarterback Jared Curtis did choose Georgia on Monday, that we don't have to tie ourselves in knots here and get into the sort of galaxy brain conversation of, well, would you rather have this or you wanted this or whatever? If a five-star quarterback is considering your school and if Curtis would choose Georgia over Oregon on Monday, can we all agree that that would be reason to celebrate, reason to be happy? Now, we know that when Curtis makes his choice, it's going to be at 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time, 4:30 Central, where he lives near Nashville. Jeff Sentell, good reporting on that yesterday for DawgNation.com. And speaking of Jeff Sentell, I think this is really interesting. Jeff Sentell last night on his program, Before the Hedges, presented by Kroger, our DawgNation recruiting show, in discussing Curtis, had what he called a totally honest, kind of conversation about Curtis, where Jeff expressed, perhaps surprisingly, I think that's the kind of the subtext here, perhaps surprisingly, as we get closer and closer to the Curtis announcement on Monday, there is reason to believe, according to Jeff, who is as inside on this as you possibly can be, there is reason to believe that Georgia might be in a pretty good spot for the five-star. This is from last night on Before the Hedges. I think it's interesting from Jeff Sentell. I want you to take a listen to this.
Gets really real. Kaylee, we just reported on DawgNation.com earlier today that that announcement has been set, and I'm kind of going to be totally honest here, Kaylee. I didn't really think, there's a lot of buzz with the Dawgs right now. There's a lot of buzz with the Dawgs, and I kind of am like, it's kind of head-scratching because it seems like Georgia, should they go on to sign Curtis, that's doing something we haven't seen before in the Kirby Smart era. It's Oregon, it's Georgia. A lot of the national pundits weigh in with their expertise and their sources, and I keep waiting for somebody to say, it changed, or some late money has came to the table or whatever, but you're kind of not hearing it right now, and you're kind of hearing that maybe location, familiarity. Remember, Oregon has had turnover for the last couple years at its coordinator spot, quarterback coach spot. Georgia has basically been Coach Bobo and Coach Smart and a lot of some of the same offensive staff. And, there's also the location, Kaylee. It's 1,900 miles to Oregon.
I think that's Jeff calls it a, totally honest discussion. I think that's pretty honest. It sounds like Jeff has been in anticipation for a while that eventually Oregon would make this sort of big financial offer, the phrase I've used before, they're just sort of money whip Georgia on this, and that whatever good vibes have existed between the Curtis family and Georgia, close relationship with Mike Bobo, kind of close proximity to their home in Tennessee, that eventually just overwhelming financial firepower that Phil Knight can bring to the table for his alma mater, that might eventually win out. And as I said before, going back to the notion of an emotional hedge, there's no guarantee that that won't eventually come because, Georgia fans sort of feel like they've been there before, whether it be Justice Terry or you want to go back a couple of years ago for maybe like an Arch Manning, or you can sort of cite examples, in recent years where 11th hour, things sort of change. It feels like more things change at the 11th hour now than kind of used to, that perhaps all of this happens for Georgia and Jared Curtis, and eventually he chooses Oregon. And for the people who've kind of always thought that's what he was going to do, they'll get their chance to say, see, I told you so. Maybe that's going to happen. It's certainly not my guarantee here today that Curtis is going to pick Georgia. It is, though, my opinion that if Jeff Sentell is taking it seriously, then I'm going to take it seriously too. That there is a very good chance, according to what we just heard, that Georgia could actually win this recruitment, and paying very close attention to this on Monday, seems like a pretty wise thing to do. Now, let me get into more detail on kind of why I think this is interesting here for a moment. Jeff mentioned in that clip you just heard that if Georgia were to do this, it would be a little bit of, I guess, going against type for what Georgia has done in recent years. Georgia has not been, maybe the most aggressive team for a quarterback like this. We certainly believe they've spent big. More on that in a moment. But this would be a little bit different for Georgia. And I might, humbly suggest maybe a slight difference in the way that Georgia goes about its business might be kind of a wise thing to do. Because the one thing we've been told is when you look at elite prospects of the class of 2026, we've talked about, Jackson Cantwell this week. You talk about, Jared Curtis right now. An in-state guy like Tyler Atkinson, we've talked about him before. There are a lot of names we're going to mention in terms of the true elite in-state prospects for the class of 2026. And the question comes up of, well, which ones of those might you prioritize? If there's only so much money to go around, if you can't sort of get everybody, you certainly can't buy everybody given the price that a lot of these elite prospects are going to come with, which ones might you prioritize? And I would suggest for Georgia, the idea of prioritizing a player like Curtis, maybe a Jackson Cantwell to go with him, maybe given the recent trend with the program, maybe that's not necessarily a bad idea. I want to show you something on the screen here for a moment. And I want to be really careful about how I talk about this because I don't want to criticize this as a negative thing. I just think this is a somewhat interesting observation. Fox Sports the other day put out a list of the positions in the NFL that have been most coveted in the NFL draft. And no surprise here, quarterback, the most coveted. There have been 35 total quarterbacks taken in the first round of the last 10 years, 26 of those taken in the top 10. Next most coveted position, edge rusher. Number 3 on the list, wide receiver. Then it's cornerback. Then it's offensive and defensive tackle in that order. 7th is running back. Then you get to inside linebacker, offensive guard, tight end, safety, and center. Center 12th on the list, just 6 centers taken in the first round of the NFL draft. Now, once again, you can leave it on the screen for a second if you don't mind, because I want to kind of dive into this a little bit more. And I want to be really clear here. What I'm about to say is not meant to be a negative. It's not meant to be a criticism. But isn't it interesting? If you were to say, hey, which positions has Georgia been the very best at? Georgia almost always has an elite coveted center. Not always a first-round draft pick. There are very few of those. But center, the least popular position for the first round of the NFL draft, is a position that Georgia has a really good history of being very good at. Just above center is safety. How many great safeties does Georgia have? And listen, I'm glad for every one of them. Now, this year, Georgia did have a first-round safety, Malachi Starks. But, Louis Ceen's been a first-round safety. J.R. Reed's been an All-American. Richard LeCount was a key program leader. I am very glad for all of the safeties that Georgia has had, all of the elite ones. We think K.J. Bolden is kind of next in line on that. More on that coming up in a moment. But isn't it interesting that the second most popular, I should say the second least popular position for a first-round draft picks over the last 10 years is also a position in which Georgia is typically kind of at the best. Tight end is 10th on the list. My gosh, one of the 4 greatest players in Georgia history just came out of this program as a tight end. You're so glad to have him. He was an elite catalyst for 2 national championship teams. But it's another example of what we say before. And kind of the non-premium positions, just so happens that's where Georgia has sort of been at its best. Above that, 9th on the list, offensive guard. Above that, inside linebacker. Once again, Georgia's got multiple Butkus. They've had 3 different Butkus Award winners. Their offensive guards always rank among the best in college football, and you're glad to have all of them. The NFL loves them too. But Georgia has kind of been at its best players, its most coveted NFL draft picks for the most part in recent years have sort of been these, what I'll describe as non-premium positions the NFL from a first-round standpoint and certainly from a top 10 standpoint just doesn't covet quite as much. Center, safety, tight end, offensive guard, inside linebacker, that's where the best of Georgia has been. Conversely, top of the list, quarterback, edge rusher, wide receiver, those are not really the positions that Georgia has been as dominant at. And maybe in the case of a Jared Curtis or a Jackson Cantwell, maybe now with your NIL dollars, you have a chance to spend in such a way that gives that the opportunity to change. Is what I'm saying making sense? I'm certainly not criticizing the talent that Georgia has had. I just think it's interesting that a lot of that talent has been populated in what the NFL kind of views as a non-premium position. And spending big to get a guy like Curtis is a chance to change that brand perhaps slightly just a bit. But a lot of Georgia fans are going to say, well, BA, even if you wanted to do that, and even if you could, the odds are that Georgia just gets outbid for a guy like Curtis because we're led to believe that Georgia just doesn't spend to the same degree that some other programs do. In fact, there's been some reporting last couple of days. Did you see where I guess it's being said that Texas is the not a program for Curtis, but the program that Georgia frequently competes against, is supposedly having an NIL budget. It was Kirk Bowles in Houston Chronicle that reported this. Their NIL budget for this year, or their payroll budget, if you just want to say it that way, because not all of this is NIL. Now some of this is revenue sharing. It's going to sit somewhere between $35 and $40 million for the upcoming year, which is a huge increase over what it's believed that Ohio State spent for its national championship a year ago. And there you go. This is Kirk Bowles from the Houston Chronicle, longtime reporter around Texas. He says Texas is going to spend $35 to $40 million on their football roster here for this year. Bowles is a serious guy. If he says that, it's likely true. And for a lot of Georgia fans, they just sort of throw up their hand in frustration. They say, well, oh my gosh, if Texas is capable of spending this much money, and who knows what Phil Knight will spend for Oregon, Georgia's got no hope because Georgia does not spend that big. And it is true. We don't see headlines like this around Georgia spending. But ask yourself this question for a minute. And I mean this. Given how competitive Kirby Smart is, given how driven to succeed Kirby Smart is, you think he's just going to stand there and watch Texas buy the success that Georgia has enjoyed and the success that Kirby Smart still covets and chases after and hungers for? You think he's just going to stand there and watch Texas buy it, stand there and watch Oregon buy it, or Miami buy it, or one of these other teams, Ohio State, pay for it and purchase it? You think he's just going to stand there and let that happen? In other words, I don't know what Georgia is going to spend on its football roster here for this year. Obviously, we have tangible reason to believe that a Texas or an Oregon, maybe a Miami, those are programs that are capable of spending more than Georgia's capable of spending. But if you kind of want to think about this like an algebraic equation where you sort of solve for X being how much Georgia spends, if we know that Texas is spending $35 to $40 million, my attempt to sort of solve for X and determine what is Georgia spending, my guess is it's something close. It is. It is. They may not have as much money as Texas, but they are not going to stand there and watch Texas buy from them the success that Georgia believes it deserves. That if Texas is spending $35 to $40 million, that Georgia is likely spending something close to that, even if you never see the headlines that confirm that. So, brings us back to Jared Curtis. Do I think that Georgia can win this recruiting battle? I do. I think that Georgia offers Curtis a lot. Certainly proximity to his home, relationship with his family, and a track record for success. Georgia has won national championships. Oregon has not done that. But in addition to that, in the NIL age we're living in right now, where money clearly matters, I think that Georgia can play the money game on this as well. And given what has been the kind of complexion of the program in recent years, maybe investing in a big-time quarterback, maybe now that makes some sense. And the offensive weapons that you need to go around him, maybe now that makes some sense. And I think that Georgia has the ability to do that. Georgia may not be the biggest spending team in NIL, but I think they're more than capable of being competitive. And on Monday evening, we may find out just how true that is. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp. We are so happy to have you with us as a part of our program today, whether you get into us live video 10 a.m. or on-demand video after that, radio, Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref podcast, wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. Just thrilled to have you with us as a part of the show today, and so thankful to our friends at Merriweather and Tharp who make it all possible. Your source for Georgia divorce. And listen, divorce is a tough conversation. We like to try to keep it light around here, like to have fun. Divorce is not fun, and divorce is not a light lighthearted conversation. It's the sort of thing that you can't go into haphazardly. You can't go into without fully, I think, respecting the emotional weight around that discussion. The good news is our friends at Meriwether and Tharp, they understand all of that. You see Bob Tharp on a weekend Georgia game. Hey, he's having a good time. He's dressed in his Georgia gear. He's got very close ties to that Georgia program, and he's very, very proud of the success they've enjoyed. And there's nobody better to hang out on game day than a guy like Bob, a truly great dude if there ever was one. But Monday through Friday, suit and ties on. Now you're working hard. Now you're taking care of people because Bob knows that the kind of work he does is really kind of a calling, right? You're not just doing business, but you're serving people in a time of need. And that may not be a time of need they ask for, but oftentimes those are your biggest needs, the sort of thing that was sort of thrust upon you, whether you wanted it or not. And so there's a lot of care and concern and, frankly, a lot of generosity in the way that Meriwether and Tharp goes about helping people in a divorce time. So I don't take this lightly. It's not something to joke about, but it is a reality for many of you. If you have kind of seen circumstance unfold where you perhaps view divorce as the sort of unavoidable next step in your life, the discussion with Meriwether and Tharp is the next thing you should do. Have that free initial consultation. And the good news is, no matter where you are in our state, Athens, Peachtree City, Carroll, Savannah, all across the state, there are offices and attorneys from Meriwether and Tharp ready to help you out with this. So the website will get you where you need to go. It's GeorgiaDivorceTeam.com. GeorgiaDivorceTeam.com. Meriwether and Tharp is your source for Georgia divorce, and we are certainly glad to have him as a part of our show today. Also glad to have Terrence Edwards here coming up in a moment. So much fun to have Terrence on the show. A lot to discuss with Terrence. We have not done that in a couple of weeks. Prior to that, though, let's go around the doghouse presented today by our friends at Daytona Beach. And one of the things we are big believers in around here is that every now and then it's appropriate to kind of hear what the national media is saying because we are very focused and zoomed in, microscopic viewpoint of Georgia football. And sometimes when you get closer to something, or if you've ever used a microscope, go back to your science class days, things like that, as you zoom in on something, sometimes the view is distorted. For instance, if I showed you like a microscopic picture of a bacteria or something like that, you wouldn't know what it is because you're just zoomed in so close that it's almost unrecognizable. It is possible to zoom in so close on Georgia football that we kind of miss the bigger picture. And on some of that kind of stuff, we do lean on the national media to help us. However, there are also moments in which we do believe the national media, because it's farther away from where we are here at the epicenter of Dog Nation, there are also moments when they perhaps get this wrong. And I want to give you an example in kind of a lighthearted way of what I believe is ESPN sort of getting something wrong about Georgia. Now, listen, you could write a lot of books about what ESPN's gotten wrong, and people have. But this is maybe just the next example of that. Interesting premise for an article. They said, okay, who's next, basically, looking at all the first-round picks in the recent NFL draft, and who steps up to replace those guys? I think it's an interesting premise for an article. I did sort of find it a little bit interesting who got mentioned from the Georgia perspective on this. For instance, Mykel Williams goes the 11th overall to the San Francisco 49ers. Who's next for him at Georgia? Well, according to ESPN, it's Elo Medozi, the recent transfer from Army. Now, I am a very big believer, just based on what I've come to know. 3 weeks ago, I couldn't have told you who Elo Medozi was to save my life. But in the recent weeks, based on what smart people who know more than me about this stuff, are saying, I've come to be a big believer in Medozi. I don't view Medozi as either a physical comp for or even kind of a statistical comp for Mykel Williams necessarily. I don't think that's the case. I think Mykel's a very different player. I think Medozi is going to have a really good chance to be on the field. But if I'm thinking, okay, physically who reminds me the most of Mykel Williams, honestly, I might say a Gabe Harris a little bit more so than a Medozi right now. And that's not an anti-Medozi take. It's just a matter of, I think Medozi is coming here to play. But if we're talking about Elo Medozi as the next Mykel Williams, then oh my gosh, you're talking about fortunes being raised here around Georgia. That's just sort of the way that goes. And I don't know that Gabe Harris is going to be the next, number 11 overall pick in the NFL draft either. But the kind of positional versatility that we would say Mykel has, I would say Harris has a lot more than that than Mendoza does. Mendoza's not that big of a guy. What is he, 240 pounds, something like that? I don't know that he could put his hand on the ground, play defensive end the way that Mykel Williams was capable of doing. I do believe Gabe Harris is capable of being the sort of stand-up outside linebacker, hand on the ground defensive end, and that positional versatility may be one of those things that we look at. Also, when you look at the number 15 overall pick in the draft, Jalen Walker, next up at Georgia, ESPN says, well, that's Chris Cole. And one of the things that ESPN cites as why it selects Cole for this is something that Justin Williams said going back to a spring practice, which was that Justin Williams said that Chris Cole kind of already reminded him of Jalen Walker. And so from that standpoint, ESPN calling Chris Cole the next Jalen Walker would seem to make some sense, just given the fact that's what Justin Williams himself had said. In fact, for more evidence on this, let me let you hear Justin Williams making that point just a couple of weeks ago.
What impresses me the most is he's I don't want to do comparisons, but he's like J. Wall. He's versatile. He can do pass rush. He can cover. He can key the line. He can play run. He can do whatever you need him to do, and he's going to be there. And he makes me a better player every day. Seeing him go chase the quarterback, it makes me like, I got to pick it up because that's my best friend. We play with each other every day, and he just makes me a better player, and I want to be like him and just work as hard as him.
So it is at least factually accurate that ESPN says, well, your own players said he was the next Jalen Walker, so why wouldn't we say that? However, what Justin Williams is not going to do is talk about himself. And in the race to be the sort of next Jalen Walker, we would say that Georgia has a lot of candidates for that. And, a minute ago I mentioned it's interesting that if you look at where Georgia has been at its best, it's oftentimes not the positions that the NFL necessarily views as the premium picks in the NFL draft. That's true. But that's not a criticism on my part because I'm very glad to have, for instance, inside linebacker. Not a premium position from a first-round pick standpoint, but the quartet of guys that Georgia has right now, C.J. Allen, Raylan Wilson, now veterans, up-and-coming guys like Chris Cole, Justin Williams, you're glad to have all of those guys. And, while ESPN chooses to highlight Chris Cole here, we've seen other national outlets highlight Justin Williams in the past. C.J. Allen continues to get a lot of love here too. I would say that given the overall depth that Georgia has at the inside linebacker position, I don't know that anybody steps up from that and becomes the number 15 overall pick. I don't know, but I got to imagine Georgia's about as deep at inside linebacker as almost anybody is at any position. So I think you take that as good news. Maybe it is Chris Cole that truly emerges there. But, gosh, it seems like Justin Williams is just about as good, and C.J. Allen and Raylan Wilson, because of their veteran experience, they're most likely, to be on the playing field here, first during the season. So I don't know that you can pick out any one guy there and say that's the guy that becomes the next Jalen Walker. Then at the bottom of the list here, when it comes to ESPN and their who's next, who steps up and replaces first-round picks, they mentioned Joenel Aguero as the replacement for Malachi Starks. And this is where we might kind of nitpick and squabble just a little bit. First of all, we really like Joenel Aguero as a player, and we've said before that if you kind of think about the swing players on the Georgia roster, the kind of guys of will they step up, and if they perform really well, then Georgia gets a massive value add because of that. We would say Aguero is one of those guys. Former elite recruit, been here for a little while, chance to be an expanded role. If he is, very good for Georgia this year, defense gets a huge boost because of that. I don't know, though, that we would put Aguero as the next man up when it comes to the departure of Malachi Starks. I'll tell you about why in a moment, but first, this is what Kirby said about Aguero, just going back to the, earlier portion of spring practice. Here's Kirby on that.
But I see Joenel getting better day by day, and he's working hard, and he's becoming more vocal, which is tough on him. He's not a vocal kid. He doesn't like to talk and open up, but he's getting better at it.
So nothing to dislike about Joenel Aguero. Kirby pretty complimentary there. But the obvious kind of next man up, even though it's not technically even, the same position that really Malachi Starks has played, in spirit, the next man up for Georgia is K.J. Bolden. Bolden's not draft eligible for the upcoming year, but we don't really care about that. It's more about how you play on the field. And we think that Bolden is on his way to being one of the most recognizable safeties in all of college football, the way that Starks was, perhaps even kind of mentioned in a similar breath to what a Caleb Downs is now for Ohio State. we think that K.J. Bolden could be on that kind of trajectory here. I don't know that ESPN fully knows that now, but I do believe they will know that by the time the season comes to an end. Even if he's not draft eligible, he'll clearly announce himself as one of the best players in college football. So just kind of a quick point there that sometimes the national media gets it really right. Sometimes the national media maybe perhaps doesn't reflect the closeness to this that many of us have. But the good news is, whether properly identified by ESPN or not, there are young, talented players perhaps ready to kind of step up to the forefront and take the next step. Their turn here coming up for UGA after a big crop of departures to the NFL draft. And that is Around the Doghouse. It's presented today by our friends at Daytona Beach. And I got to tell you, some of my best memories from childhood involve going to Daytona Beach with my parents, my grandparents. Just so much fun stuff. We still talk about this kind of stuff all the time. And the good news is there are new memories being made at Daytona Beach every single week, every single day. Easy to get to. There's an international airport. You can fly from Atlanta and get to Daytona Beach, take advantage of 23 miles of shoreline, the incredible restaurant scene there, whether you're into seafood or more like the farm-to-table stuff or really creative cuisine. They've got all of that. A lot of golf there, of course. You like surfing, you can do that. Plenty of fishing opportunities there, too. Just so much to enjoy when it comes to Daytona Beach, including some great savings on hotels and resorts right now. You want some terrific lodging. If you'll check out DaytonaBeach.com/hotel deals, you can learn all about that. It's DaytonaBeach.com/hotel deals for a lot on that today. You deserve a vacation. We would say Daytona Beach is a great place to take one. So make sure you check that out today. All right, before we are done, there is what I believe is a brewing controversy involving big-name coach and his brand-new program. This seems to be kind of running almost out of control. We'll give you more information on that before we're done. But for now, our chance to talk for the first time in a while to a great voice, terrific analyst, a guy that knows the game and always has valuable insight. How about Terrence Edwards here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Let's say hello to Terrence Edwards here, DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. And Terrence, I think one of the things, we've talked a lot about the draft success that Georgia's had. I think it's amazing to me that every year when Georgia has these huge departures, at least for now, and this may not happen forever, right? Nothing lasts forever, I don't guess. But, you just sort of run through a bunch of names. You lose Jalen Walker, but there's 4 linebackers that are ready to step up and, you could conceivably be as good as Walker was. Malachi Starks leaves. From a player standpoint, K.J. Bolden, not a perfect comparison, but, I think that K.J. Bolden's likely to be one of the better players in the SEC here this year. You could talk about, guys potentially stepping in for Mykel Williams, too. That isn't it amazing how well year after year Georgia seems to be positioned to replace all of these guys that move on to the NFL draft. It's pretty fascinating to see, right?
I think so. And if you really break it down, a lot of the guys that are been first-round picks, like Jalen Walker, was he a true starter last year? Maybe he was a sub-package guy, but he's been a true starter for 1 year. And we've seen glimpses of greatness. But just like you said, there was other guys in front of him, and he waited his turn. And his turn still ended up being a first-round pick because of those elite traits that he has. And I see the same elite traits in Chris Cole and Justin Williams as well. So I'm really excited about those 2 young linebackers, being able to see those guys being able to just run and hit people. I think that's what they do well. The rich just continue to get richer. And year after year, you see first-round linebackers just coming out of Georgia.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, the storyline seems to replicate where a couple of years ago we would have looked at Raylan Wilson and C.J. Allen and said, gosh, these 2 young guys, they may be better than the veterans who are playing in front of them. And no disrespect to anybody, but now with Justin Williams and Chris Cole, it's almost like you'd be tempted to say that again. And once again, that's not to say that Allen and Wilson both aren't really good football players, but it just seems like the ability to kind of always have those young guys waiting in the wings, that's not normal. Most programs at any position don't replicate that talent, year over year the way that Georgia does. And obviously, when you think about 3 different guys winning the Buckus Award in the Kirby Smart era, that inside linebacker position has been one of the most important positions on the field for UGA.
Yes, if as a family, if Kirby Smart was in my household and my son was a linebacker, and we know in this day and age, there's a lot of factors of while kids are choosing schools, and a lot has to do with NIL. If I'm looking at Georgia and I'm a high priority linebacker, I'm just looking at the success that Kirby has had with linebackers, and we do not have to jump in the transfer portal after 1 year if my son is not playing, because the history have shown you that if you continue to stay the course, continue to gain confidence, continue to gain weight, continue to gain strength, your time will come and you're going to be a first-round pick if you have the talent. So he's have developed some of the best linebackers over the years, and that position right now is probably the position that we have been keen probably since Kirby has gotten to Georgia, and I just continue to like the guys that they bring in at that position.
So there's been a lot of talk last little bit about the 5-star quarterback Jared Curtis. He's making his commitment announcement on Monday. Let me start with Curtis as a player. I'm not sure how much you and I have talked about him before. Have you seen much of Jared Curtis? And if you have, what stands out about his game to you?
He's a big kid with a live arm. I think most people are going to look at the level of talent that he's playing with or against. But I look at it totally different. It's all about processing. Can he process information? Can he make the throws that needs to make? And is he a leader? I think as the quarterback position, you have to be liked. Now, I've said this 1,000 times. I think what made Stetson Bennett such a great quarterback, not just his talent on the field. I just think the way the team responded to him, and I think the team really, really, really loved Stetson. They was going to do everything in their power to play for Stetson. So I'm just a big believer at the quarterback position. Like, you got to be liked by your teammates. You got to be that leader. I think Jake Fromm was the same way. I think his teammate really enjoyed playing for Jake. I think Jake was the ultimate teammate. So, yes, we would like all the measurables, but number one for me, are you a leader of men, and can you galvanize a locker room to play hard for you? And that position, we know, is the number one position in football.
No, I think that's exactly right. I think some Georgia fans, though, get a little skeptical about this, because if he's a 5-star quarterback and if Oregon is your main competition, then I think the cash register starts ringing in a lot of fans' mind of, oh, gosh, we can't afford that. That's just too expensive. But I've been of the belief, and listen, maybe Monday ends the way that some of these recruiting battles have ended in recent years where, hey, maybe the big dollars come in late and maybe the other side does win. I can't guarantee that it won't. But people do seem, including our Jeff Sentell, to be taking this pretty seriously here right now. And I have to be of the belief that if Georgia wasn't competitive financially, then they wouldn't even be one of the 2 finalists here right now. Terrence, I know you're not going to, get into the bean counting stuff necessarily, but like, what do you make of Georgia's ability to win one of these NIL era recruitments where I think, we have to just realistically assume that the dollars are a part of this? How realistic do you think that Georgia, how realistic do you think it is that Georgia could win one of these types of battles?
Well, we're in the top 2, so we're there for a reason. And I say this to a lot of people, just an example. If Oregon is offering him, and I know it's way more, just using this as an example, if Oregon is offering him $2 million and Georgia is offering him 1.5, what can I buy with my 1.5 that I can't buy with that $2 million? Or what can I, you know what I'm saying? So we can buy the exact same thing. Now it comes down to, yes, both teams are competitive for its compensation. Oregon may be $500,000 more. But that's life-changing money. I don't see why that family or any family will come down to it being a fight over amount of money that is not significant enough to fight over. Now, if it's $2 million difference, is a $1.5 million difference, I can understand it. But if it's like 500,000 difference, now it comes to what it's always come down to, is relationship. It comes down to where you see yourself. and where you see yourself living for the next 4 or 5 years.
No, I think that's exactly right. And that's obviously spoken as someone who kind of understands professional football and what paydays are all about, that there are things to consider more than money, which is not to say you shouldn't consider money, but there are things other than money that got to be consideration here about where you want to live, who you want to live around. You know, the situation is perhaps as important as the financial part of that, assuming that the financial stuff is closed. And along those same lines, you know, there's reporting out there, Kirk Bowles is a respected guy, you know, the notion that Texas this upcoming year going to spend like $35 or $40 million on its roster. That seems like an eye-popping number, but my assumption is, though, Terrence, even though we won't ever see these headlines, Georgia's just kind of quiet about this sort of thing. My assumption is that whatever Georgia's spending on its roster this year is probably pretty close. Same type of deal. It may not be the absolute most, but it's got to be in the ballpark. Otherwise, Georgia wouldn't have the roster that it has. So when people see that from Texas, and well, I think we would take it somewhat seriously, you know, I don't take that as well, I guess that means that Georgia's doomed. I take that as well, I guess that means that Georgia must be spending pretty close to the same type of thing here. Do you agree with that?
I do. I think a lot of kids just want to be in the ballpark, and we really got to say this. And a lot of kids, just speaking of, they've never had opportunity, and probably no one in their family have had opportunity to see or make this much money, because I don't begrudge a kid going and taking the money at all, because a lot of them have never seen this type of money, would never see this type of money. It's probably Justin Terry out of Manchester, probably now is the wealthiest guy in his town. Who am I? Who are, if you're really truly fans of these kids, who are we to tell Justin Terry to turn down whatever money he got from Texas if that was the most money that he's got? But at some point, the adults in the room got to really look at, okay, here's the money. This is the most money we've ever seen in our lives. Now, what's important after this? And that's what it comes down to, is what's important after the money. Yes, the money's good. The money's, and you know me, I'm happy that the kids are getting this type of money, but it still got to come down to what's important. Like, money's the root of all evil, and money's not always going to make you happy, but it's a part of it. But there's other factors as well that these 17, 18-year-old kids and their families have to take into consideration.
So let me ask you a question that neither one of us know the answer to. But, you know, so if we would look at, okay, this year starts the era of like the revenue sharing. That's where the teams themselves from their own bank account get to pay the players. Well, thus far, it sort of looks like a lot of infusions of cash into a market. This is just inflationary right now, that what was $25 million for a national championship a year ago, maybe $40 million for a national championship this year, which kind of roughly coincides with the amount of money kind of being pumped in by the revenue sharing, just sort of basic economics 101. But we've also got this thing of, well, now the House settlement, I don't know how much you follow that, but now the House settlement's about to kick in, and all of a sudden now we're going to put a cap on NIL spending, and we're going to have these third-party evaluations. It's all going to be fair market value, and in a roundabout way, the end result of that would be that teams are going to spend less, players are going to get theoretically paid less. Terrence, is there any way in the world these players are going to agree to take less money than what they're getting now? Because we're led to believe that all these teams are spending like crazy right now because the law is about to crack down on all of this. But how are the players going to agree to that? Because the way it's been described, I mean, I think would be a significant reduction in payday for some of these guys. Are they going to agree to that?
Well, I don't know if they have to agree or not. Are the players going to have a union? Are the players going to have representation at the table when all this laws and legislation break? If they don't have a union or someone kind of being the commissioner of the Players Association, can they agree to not take less money? So if there's legislation and laws, from what I'm hearing, they don't have a choice unless they decide not to play college football. I don't know. I haven't got too deep in that. That's too much for me.
Yeah.
I just love developing kids, watching football, and just enjoying the game that I love to play.
Now, listen, I'm right there with you on that. Some of this gets to be pretty complicated after a while. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Hey, let me finish with one more thing before we let you go. So I was talking about this a little earlier, and as I said before, I try to make very clear this is not a criticism from me. It's just an observation that when you look at, and Fox Sports had these numbers, the last 10 years of first-round picks, the positions that are drafted the least frequently in the first round, and certainly the least frequently in like the top 10 of the first round, it just so happens these are the positions that Georgia typically is the best at. Interior offensive line, safety, inside linebacker, and I'm telling you right now, we love all those guys. You know, tight end, one of the great players of all time. You love all of these guys, but on the flip side of that, quarterback, edge rusher, wide receiver, the most valued premium positions, that's not really where Georgia has been at its best. Do you think Georgia would, as a program, would be better if they had a little more balance between the so-called premium and non-premium positions, if they were a little deeper and more, I guess, prolific with, like, say, edge rusher, wide receiver, these really valued positions, obviously quarterback? Would that be a better version of Georgia in your mind?
I think Jimmy's and Joe's is always what makes your program. The better players that you have, the better you're going to be. I just think Kirby's philosophy is he's trying to build from within. I think he wants the big guys. I've heard him say this plenty of times. He want people who can move people. So he's always gonna, I think, spend his money on the bigger guys that are inside, the guards, the centers, the tackles, the edge. Like, he's gonna spend his money, as you can see in the transfer portal. He won't big men. So I think his philosophy is we have won with the game plan or the playbook that he's had for 10 years, and he's always been right there at the door, if not kicked in the door twice. But at the end of the day, the better players are always going to make you look better as a coach. So, yes, if we could go out and get a Jeremiah Smith, or we could go out and get a Will Anderson, like those dominant players at those positions, yes, I would love to have those guys. I guess this is just the formula Kirby have seen as success from his Alabama days, and now he's done pretty darn well with his philosophy now. But I would love always to have that edge rusher, that Will Anderson type, where he is a game changer, or Jeremiah Smith at the wide receiver position. We would always love to have those types of guys, but that's not what he's going to pay for.
Yeah, no doubt about that. By the way, great shot of you and your guy, C.J. Wiley there. Fun thing to be able to see that. Did you have a good time at G-Day, by the way? You got a chance to be up close. I don't think we've even talked to you since then. Did you have a good time with all of that?
I did, and what you probably don't know is we had my senior retreat for my Mount Vernon team. That's what we did for our senior retreat. We went down Friday night.
Nice.
I took them to Blind Pig, one of the staple restaurants that I ate at a lot when I was there. Then we went bowling, got up the next morning, had a good breakfast, and had opportunity to tour the field. And some of the guys on my team would never get that opportunity to be that close in the be in the locker room, be on the field, be able to walk the field. And they just had an absolute blast. I'm just thankful for my alma mater being able to have my team there. And we just had a blast. So that's one of the biggest reasons why I was there for my senior retreat here at Mount Vernon.
Yeah, great shot of that, and really good stuff. And obviously the Terrence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy. I know you're busy right now. You guys probably have spring practice going on here, but the Terrence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy is always out there too. So for people who want more of you, including connecting online, learning more about the Terrence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy, how can they get in touch?
Yes, it's on pause right now because of spring practice, but you're looking this summer after spring practice to continue to get better at the wide receiver position. You can find me on all social media platforms at Terrence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy. And everybody go check out my Instagram on my story. You can watch my son, Terrence, make a couple good catches at his spring practice at Woodward Academy.
There's nothing like seeing that, right, Terrence? And obviously Woodward Academy's had a great run of wide receivers as of late, but there's nothing like seeing your own son go out there and do that kind of stuff like that. I know how gratifying that must be for you.
It is. His name is Terrence Edwards II, so I gave him my namesake. He looked just like me, but he loves football, and I love watching him compete. Both of my sons will be in high school next year.
That's exciting stuff, Terrence. I can't wait to see more from them, and Great stuff with you, and I hope you have a great week. We'll look forward to talking to you soon here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp.
Thank you.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, can you imagine Terrence, a great wide receiver himself, obviously a great wide receivers coach and head coach too at the high school level. Now his son's kind of ready to step up and do that. Look, the sense of pride that you get from just watching your kids go out there and compete in sports, there's nothing like that anywhere. I know, parents in sports get the bad rap, things like that. We try not to take it too seriously, go too crazy or anything like that. But there is nothing that just, I don't know, the sense of connection you feel watching them kind of go out there and compete, good times, bad times. You have success, you have failure. There's no better teacher in life than the lived experience of sports. And for a guy like Terrence, who was a great player, to now see his, sons following in his footsteps, that's just an awesome thing to be able to see. All right, let's get ready to go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And the buzz right now is amazing for the fact that we've already been able to announce the 2026 DawgNation Cruise. The fact that we're going to be back again on Utopia of the Seas. And many of you know this. Utopia of the Seas is right now the hottest ticket in cruising. And it was not a guarantee a year ago that we could have gotten on Utopia for our cruise. We command a lot of staterooms, hundreds of staterooms, for a ship like Utopia of the Seas that basically sells out every sailing, an incredibly popular ship. It was not a guarantee that we were going to be able to get onto Utopia of the Seas for our DawgNation Cruise. We have a great friend. Her name's Robin. She works for Royal Caribbean. She's part of their team, and she was able to kind of help us get that locked in and get ready to go and be a part of that of that DawgNation Cruise. And we locked it in again for 2026. So much so that when we were on our DawgNation Cruise, we were able to make that announcement while we were on board. I was so proud about that, and the feedback has been amazing. People are ready to go. They're ready to be a part of this. And so we want you to act quickly yourself. I want you to give them a call, 770. This is Jessica Slater, terrific travel advisor. She can help you out with your DawgNation Cruise plan, 770-718-9147. The number, once again, 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com, if you want to be a part of the biggest party the dog fans going to have, the ultimate experience on board Utopia of the Seas. You can get that. Jessica Slater can tell you how, so make sure you check that out today. And by the way, speaking of Royal Caribbean, let's go cruise around the SEC right now, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And earlier I mentioned ESPN kind of looking at kind of who's next, stepping in for draft picks. We talked about the Georgia guys. They also kind of highlighted a couple of names around the SEC. And I want to kind of run through a few of these here just for a moment, because I do think that this is a pretty good snapshot about what the rest of the leagues are going to kind of look like. First of all, we saw Will Campbell, offensive tackle for LSU, go high in this draft. I think what LSU does next at these kind of, sort of brick and mortar positions in college football is going to be really important. Brian Kelly's had a hard time figuring out the NIL game since he's been at LSU. They've missed out. Like, they added a bunch of guys in the portal defensively 2 years ago. Those guys didn't necessarily work out. They've had a hard time kind of populating their lines of scrimmage. LSU offensive line's been an issue now for quite some time. But with quarterback in place, Garrett Nussmeier believed to be among the best in the SEC. With quarterback in place, his decision return is a very big deal. If LSU can kind of repopulate the offensive line, continue to work to get a little bit better on defense, kind of getting back to the old LSU standard, and this really could be one of the league's best teams. And they're not necessarily going to be predicted like preseason top 5 or maybe even top 10, but they are going to be close enough that if what they put around Nussmeier clicks, then obviously LSU could be in really good shape. That's one of those things you'll be watching very closely. Another name that ESPN mentioned in the story is Ryan Wingo, the Texas wide receiver. Wingo was freshman a year ago. We thought he did some good things. I know there is some skepticism about Arch Manning as the Texas quarterback. I attribute most of that to the fact that people just don't like the media. At least a lot of people don't. Certain segments of the media for sure. And I think a lot of people kind of view Manning as a media creation because it's the famous last name, because it's a kind of what people sometimes view as an overhyped program like Texas. That is true, though. I'll be surprised if Manning isn't one of the better quarterbacks in the sport this year. I take pretty seriously some of the chatter that has existed around Manning while he's been at Texas. We didn't see a lot of this on the field in brief glimpses last year, but the people in Austin seem to think that Manning really is good, and obviously it's a complicated situation with Quinn Ewers this past year, but I think that Manning's about to get his moment, but he needs talent around him. The one thing that he's going to benefit from is Texas had a lot of running back injuries just prior to last season. It seems like they're going to be healthier or deeper at the running back position this year because of a return to health than maybe they were a year ago. But a guy like Wingo stepping up is also, I believe, a really big deal. That's one of those names to watch in the SEC. Another name that ESPN mentions is Austin Simmons. This is the new Ole Miss quarterback. You'll remember that we got a dose of Simmons in that game against Ole Miss, and pretty much everything for Ole Miss went well against Georgia this past season. Simmons' drive, another example of that, led a touchdown. And it's kind of interesting. We don't talk very much about Simmons right now. He's not generating a lot of chatter around the SEC. But, Lane Kiffin is thought to be a great tutor of quarterbacks, innovative, sharp, offensive mind. Obviously, when you realize that Jackson Dart climbed draft boards to the point that he was a first-round pick, you're now reconsidering this and realizing, wow, Ole Miss has very big shoes to fill with Dart no longer being there. And sometimes I use the phrase swing player. I think Austin Simmons is a very big swing player in the SEC. I think it's possible that Ole Miss is not a top 25 team this year and that the window for a championship closed after last season for Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss. I think it's entirely possible. If Austin Simmons is just sort of a regular quarterback, if he's good but not great, if he's somewhere around the league median, very good chance that Ole Miss is 8-4, 7-5, kind of outside the top 25 conversation, quite possible. But based on what we saw when Simmons played against Georgia, you would also be led to believe, hey, maybe Simmons is better than that. Maybe he's kind of an upper third quarterback in the SEC. Maybe he generates some attention, becomes a little bit more of a household name. Well, if that be the case, then maybe Ole Miss kind of getting back to something close to what it was a year ago. They lost a lot on defense, and that matters. But getting back to something close to what they were a year ago, maybe that's a possibility. This is one of those guys that I think will probably get a lot more interested in as the season gets closer because, A, for Georgia, this is self-serving. Georgia plays Ole Miss. On paper, Rebels don't seem to be as deep as they were a year ago. But if Simmons really steps up, that could change. The final name I want to mention here is Joshua Josephs. This is the guy thought to be the replacement for James Pierce there for Tennessee. And last year, and we've said this many, many times, for all of the attention that Nico Iamaleava has gotten, Tennessee was really not about Nico last season. It was about a very good running game and really a terrific defense. And I'll be honest with you, in a lot of ways, Josh Heupel has become a better coach than I thought he could be because given the unique nature of his offense, I really felt like playing so fast, being sort of committed to, kind of just a very different kind of scheme, wide receivers spread out, real wide, playing super fast. I really felt like it was going to be hard for Heupel to ever build a true defense there at Tennessee just because the pace of play was going to put your defense in harm's way. And that's true this last year. Tennessee was a lot more about defense than it was offense. The defense for the Vols a year ago was much better than the offense. They didn't have great receivers. They leaned on defense. They leaned on running game. Can guys like Joseph step up and allow that to remain true? Can they still kind of be the same type of team? Because now that they've lost Nico and traded him for Aguilar from UCLA and kind of a little bit of uncertainty about who the Tennessee starting quarterback is going to be, the need to be a little bit more of a traditional SEC team once again is probably more significant than it was before they realized they weren't going to have Nico at quarterback. This is not one of those storylines, whether it be Joseph's or the other guys around him, they're going to be looking at pretty closely, which is, can Tennessee replicate the style that it used a year ago, running game and defense, and frankly kind of minimizing quarterback mistakes because a year ago with Nico, they had to do that. Let me mention a couple of other things real quick kind of outside the SEC. First of all, starting with Bill Belichick. I put this on X last night. I was actually surprised. I thought this would be something people disagreed with, but people by and large, at least those who saw it, seemed to agree with it. I've told you many times before, including earlier this week, that I believe that Bill Belichick's going to be one and done at North Carolina. I think this is a failed experiment. I don't think that Belichick knows what he's getting into in college football. I don't think he's counted the cost properly here. And I think that North Carolina, as frankly as an institution, sort of embarrassed itself by hitching its wagon to Belichick in this late stage of his professional career at a time in which his personal life seems to be a little bit of a mess. Well, now, in the aftermath of the CBS Sunday Morning interview from this past weekend, I said on X last night, I'd take a small wager on a long shot bet that Belichick doesn't coach a game at all for North Carolina, that somehow prior to the start of the season, they just scrap this entire deal. They'll make up some reason why, and Belichick just rides off in the sunset and tries to figure out, what he wants his 8th decade of life to look like. Because this is kind of a mess right now. There's also the New York Post story yesterday about the young lady that he's dating. She somehow amassed a multi-million-dollar real estate portfolio in the last few months. If that doesn't cause red flags to go off left and right, I don't know what does. And I'm not suggesting there's impropriety there. I don't know. But anytime you talk about that kind of acquisition of real estate in a short period of time for someone that before that wasn't kind of swimming in those waters, I'm sure there's going to be some scrutiny around that. Also, we seem to be learning more about her and her family by the day. That gets weird. And we don't do soap opera stuff around here. We don't get into we've just never gotten into any of that. And frankly, I'm not interested in the soap opera details on any of this either. I just know that this is conduct unbecoming for a coach of a major college program. And this is going to come across weird. I don't mean for it to. Over the course of years in the SEC, we've had a lot of SEC coaches, some of this reported on the record, some of this just rumored, but we've had a lot of SEC coaches who've had somewhat checkered personal lives. I don't take that lightly. But I would say in most instances, when we kind of see this in the SEC, the trouble in the personal life comes because a little too committed to the job. And I'm not saying that makes it any better, but the reason why things kind of go off the rails in the personal life oftentimes is because they just work too hard. They're in the facility from, dawn till midnight or later, and they're just sort of burning the candle at both ends. And that oftentimes creates a little bit of, issues kind of away from work. Sometimes we see that. In the case of Belichick, whatever's going on here, that's not what this is. It almost seems like Belichick has gotten involved in whatever all of this is because he didn't have enough to do. And like I said before, I don't know that he has given proper consideration to exactly what it takes to win at the college level right now. And, North Carolina is a program that's got some prestige. They've got some following. They've got some money around them. They would have a chance to be in an expanded version of the SEC if the SEC ever chose to do that. They would be on the radar, clearly more so than any other ACC team, I believe, to be in the SEC. And yet this is who they've chosen to hitch their wagon to as a coach, a guy who's got a very odd personal relationship right now that was kind of playing out on CBS television here this weekend. It is an absolute mess. Belichick is disgracing himself. And this is heading for such a disaster, I believe, that you almost wonder if it's not over before it starts. Let me mention one more thing here, too, on a completely different note. So where Ryan Day was on the ESPN College Game Day podcast with Reese Davis, and Day was asked about his quarterback situation. What I thought was really interesting is, and I'll be honest with you, I know a lot more about Julian Sayin than I know the other two quarterbacks that are competing here. But I thought Day, who we don't like, obviously, but I thought that Day was pretty candid in how he spoke about the quarterback competition in a way that you almost never hear. The three guys, the youngest guy, Day's like, well, listen, this guy's way behind the others right now. And he says, the other guy fighting with Julian Sayin, that guy was ahead of Sayin, but then Sayin had the best spring game, and so now maybe Sayin's made up that ground. It was just really interesting how specific and candid Day was about all of this. Eventually, I think this ends with Julian Sayin being the Ohio State starting quarterback. That's where I believe it's going. But as we kind of wait for that to occur, I just thought it was kind of interesting and perhaps somewhat refreshing to hear Day be pretty open about the way in which the quarterback competition has kind of changed as the spring played out. I thought it was kind of a refreshing level of candor in a way we don't always get from coaches. Why don't we say make that cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Before we wrap it up here today, let me also give a shout out to our friends at the Finnish Long Drink. You got all kinds of stuff coming up. A lot of folks enjoying themselves outside this time of year. Y'all know, whether it's playing golf or watching the horse race on Saturday or anything else that's going on, the Finnish Long Drink is a great way to enjoy all of that. Peach-flavored version, the Peach State for a limited time. I've heard from some people on our Dog Nation cruise. They were bragging on that pineapple flavor. People like that. How about the long drink? Traditional, that's the traditional citrus, the blue can, the grapefruit flavor, the gin kick. You know, that still kind of remains my, I guess, favorite here. My wife likes the long drink cranberry. Long drink strong, 8.5% alcohol by volume. We love the Finnish long drink. We think spring and summer is sort of the perfect time of year for that. So this is a great time to get out and enjoy that. So make sure you do. You can find out online where you can pick some up. The story about how it kind of gets from Helsinki, where it starts, to America, here to Georgia, now a big part of DawgNation, all of that online, thelongdrink.com. So make sure you check that out today. One of the things we've talked about in recent days is just the love that Georgia has gotten from various NFL teams. Famously, the Philadelphia Eagles, obviously the biggest example of this, but not the only one. We played the clip yesterday of the Lions GM talking about Georgia, and when Detroit shared this in its social media, they really tried to show Georgia some love, tagging Georgia and kind of giving you some of the lyrics there of Georgia on my mind. There was also the post they put out not too long ago where they're like, you know, the stepbrothers line about, did we just become best friends? So Detroit, with its official social media account on X, is where I saw it, really showing a lot of love to Georgia football. So I think that's cool. I think that's fun. Another one of these NFL teams embracing Georgia. We would say that's worth a golden shoe here today. How about the lousy stinking Gators? 1,636 days. That's how long it's been since Florida has beaten Georgia. That is our Gator Hater Updater. Y'all have a great day. Oh, we'll see you tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time, doing the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust them on all of that. By the way, let me also, as we roll into our cool down here, give a shout out to our friends at ServPro. Looking forward to hanging out with them tonight. They're in Athens. We're going to go see Riley Green tonight at the Aikens Ford Arena. I'm excited about that. So that is coming up for me, but your comments coming up right now. Let me start on DawgNation.com here right now. We'll see how people are doing, and we'll kind of get ready for some fun here today. Won't go real long today just because we got other stuff going on, but good to see everybody here. Bill Camacho letting us know that 122 days, by the way, before the start of the 2025 season, so that is a fun thing. You know, once you kind of get inside 100 days, you sort of realize, man, that's real stuff. So we're getting there on all of that. So that is certainly fun. Okay, I've successfully figured out how to scroll on DawgNation.com. So that's good. Dave Snow, good to see him here. You love that. Glad that he's here today. Dave Snow, I was talking about Belichick and his female companion. Listen, I said before, I think we probably do less soap opera stuff than anybody. We never touched any of the TikTok stuff. Like, we just don't do any of that kind of thing. The two twins, we've never mentioned them I don't think by name on the show. We just don't do that kind of thing. Like, I really don't care who Bill Belichick is dating. I really don't. I think we really do a pretty good job of just avoiding that sort of thing. But in this particular case, I do think this goes to his ability to be a clear-eyed football coach. I really do. And I'm also of the belief, and I have no way of knowing this. This is just my very strong assumption. I think if Belichick had gotten another NFL job, I don't think he'd be behaving this way at all. I really don't. And, you know, late in his career in New England, he kind of did some weird stuff. I won't dispute that. I'm talking about personnel decisions. But I think a lot of this, if I had to be like armchair psychologist for a moment, which is always a dangerous thing to do, I think a lot of this is just a level of sideways energy, kind of unresolved frustration about the fact that I just believe collectively, only a few games shy of becoming the winningest coach in NFL history, the league just said, we're just sort of done with you. And I think that's incredibly frustrating. I don't think Belichick made very many friends over the years. I think there are also some issues that I think cost him some real trouble. And I just think the league said collectively, at least for now, we're done with you. Maybe we'll circle back and give you another chance in a couple of years, but at least for now, we're done with you. And he has to live with the notion that, man, I could have been the winningest coach of all time, and now I'm probably not going to be. Let's see what else. Let's see what else. Just scrolling up here at DawgNation.com, see what people are doing. UGA Marine time on the Dawg Nation cruise. Listen, if you ever get a chance to come, it's a good experience. It's a good experience. Low Country Dog says he's coming next year. Low Country, can't wait to have you on board. I'm telling you, you're going to love it. It's a great experience. It is a great experience. So a lot of good stuff over there at DawgNation.com right now. Let me check in on the YouTube folks here for a moment, see how they are doing. See what is going on with them. Shane Holiday going to the Riley Green concert tonight. Shane, I hope I see you. That's awesome. If you do see me, please come say hello. G. Grace says he's going to be there, but wearing his Bama gear. Do you know after all these years, I've never seen G. Grace? Don't know what he looks like. I would love to see you too, G. No surprise that you'll be dressed up in your Bama gear. Jack Fullerton, going back to the days of Jerry Glanville as Falcons coach. Yeah, listen, he was a very colorful character and ultimately did not win a lot here in Atlanta. But I'm going to tell you right now, I remember when Glanville became the Falcons coach. You talk about a guy who kind of took the city over, very different version of Atlanta. Atlanta was a much smaller town back then. Kind of functioned more like a mid-sized city than a true big city, I think. But, boy, Glanville was so popular there for a while. I think the act wore thin pretty quick. And that's the problem sometimes with, like, kind of gimmicky type guys, shticky type guys. It just sort of wears thin pretty quick. But, boy, when it first got going, people thought that Glanville was a breath of fresh air for Atlanta. People loved – I mean, some of y'all are older than me, so you'll have better memories of that than maybe I do. I was pretty young. My memory is that Glanville was hugely popular, at least for a little while, as Falcons coach, and then it went away just like that because it's like what seems eccentric when you're winning becomes silly when you're losing, and I think it got silly pretty fast around here. Let us see what else. Jonathan Aaron says that Pat McAfee said that Ryan Day doesn't color his beard. I'm telling you right now, there's no way that's true. There's no way that's true. And listen, Day's a better looking guy than I am. I can't dispute that. But this idea that any human being Day's age has a beard that's dark, I'm just telling you right now, that is not a naturally occurring phenomenon. It is just not. It is just not. Tyrone Brown asked about the new Tennessee quarterback. I mean, I would say right now we don't quite know who it's going to be. You know, Aguilar was set up to start for UCLA, but I don't know that guarantees that he'll start for Tennessee. I would say that both Merklinger and McIntyre will have their chance to win that job. So I think the first question is, who wins the job? And this is like one of those deals that I sometimes say a lot. I mean, ultimately, whoever starts at quarterback for Tennessee this year, I think statistically speaking, has a chance to be about as good as Nico was a year ago without a whole lot of, I don't think it's some sort of huge leap to assume that you get there on that. What we'll never know is how good Nico in year 3 could have been in the offensive system he was trained to be in. You know, I think that Nico at another school, Tennessee with a different quarterback, both entities probably set up to be less than they otherwise would have been. But if you give him my choice of Heupel developing a different quarterback or Nico being developed by a different coach, I'll take Heupel and whoever emerges for him. Let us see what else. There's some stuff coming up here about Deion Sanders in the chat today. I mean, look, as far as like Deion's role and what has gone on with Shedeur, I think here's the only thing I'll say about that. I think that Deion as a coach is actually a good bit different than people assume that he is. You know, we remember, and listen, you talk about formative years of my life, when Deion was here in Atlanta as both a Brave and a Falcon, he was neon Deion. He was prime time. It was a lot of flash, a lot of sizzle, and that's kind of how he's known. But the honest truth, as a coach, that's sort of not what he's about. If you listen to him as a coach, a lot of the things that he says sounds a lot like what other football coaches say, even though he's tried to craft this persona of being different than the typical coach. I think that Deion's worldview, the best that I can tell, actually fits in with a lot of other kind of old school minded coaches. Remember, Deion, he's older than I am for sure, good bit older than me. Deion's not a young fellow. Deion sort of brings that kind of old school mindset into football, no matter how flashy he might have been as a player and how much, outside kind of, I guess, veneer of flash he still tries to provide now. But I think the one knock on him I would have from the Shedeur episode is, like a lot of people, it seems like Deion was willing to tolerate from Shedeur what he might not have been willing to tolerate from other players. If other players had just shown, I mean, the best that I can tell, and I said this the other day, I don't know that I knew a lot of this about Shedeur prior. I just don't really care enough to know. It certainly seems like Shedeur's got a pretty low level of emotional intelligence. In other words, what you need to do to relate to the person standing in front of you, it seems like Shedeur doesn't properly understand that, and it's just a real turnoff to the NFL personnel men who've spent time with him. A little too me-focused, it seems like anyway. And I guess that Deion's the kind of guy that is pretty good at coaching that out of you, but maybe made the mistake of tolerating from his own son out of love, or a version of love, tolerated from his own son what he would not have been willing to tolerate from other players. And that, to me, seems to be the story there on that. Shane Bentley says retiring his number did not help. Yeah, that does not look good. And, I know that Colorado was winless before Deion got there, and so the turnaround that Deion has orchestrated is commendable. But Colorado also has a history. They won the one true national championship in 1990. They got the Cordell Stewart era. You could Rashawn Salam won a Heisman. We can rattle off great players that have played, at Colorado, certainly in the Bill McCartney era. This is not a program absent of history. To retire, Shedeur's number, maybe Travis Hunter deserved it because of the Heisman Trophy, but to retire Shedeur's number, I don't know. I would say that doesn't look great. Johnny Surfdog pointing out LeBron James first-round exit. Excuse me. The former dog, Ant-Man, showing that he's got that dog in him. Do people still say that? Got that dog in him when it comes to the NBA playoffs. For sure. Let me go to Facebook here for a moment. We'll see how people are doing there. Let us see on the Facebook side of things. Jacob O'Neill says, when's our next cruise? I mean, I will tell you, inside baseball, I am really hopeful just before the season begins to sneak away quickly. I'm hopeful on Star of the Seas when it debuts. And look, I take very seriously my role here of trying to let you know about the great things going on in the Royal Caribbean. One of the things I do take very seriously. And I feel like if there's going to be a brand new ship, Star of the Seas, well, if I come on here and say, hey, man, y'all got to go see Star of the Seas, you're going to love it. Well, if I don't have any personal, history with that, if I haven't seen it with my own eyes, how could I effectively tell you that you should be on Star of the Seas if I haven't been on Star of the Seas myself? That's kind of my belief. I take the role of ambassador for some of these great companies very seriously. I take that very seriously. So if I want to come on here in the air, and in coming weeks, you'll hear me say this a lot, boy, you got to check out Star of the Seas, brand new icon class of ship sailing out of Port Canaveral. If I say that, it only stands to reason that I should probably also experience that. That's my belief here. So maybe if the dominoes fall in the right way just prior to the start of the season, I might sneak off to go see Star of the Seas for a couple of days. We might do that. Ulysses Dunning's laugh says, "B, that's the only comment you've seen." It did sort of jump out. Brent Clark, I did not know this. He says Byron Whizzer White played football at Colorado and was later on became a U.S. Supreme Court justice. So love that. That's exciting. We were also talking about this last night. So I'm a part of the board for the Georgia High School Football Hall of Fame. I'm very proud of that. It's the only board I think I've ever been on. So I just like being on a board. I think that's a great thing. But we're talking about like players from like the early era. I'm talking about like 1920s, 1930s. It's really hard to find good information about them. There's not a lot of, surviving media, printed media that tells you a lot about them. But man, so many of these guys had great nicknames, great nicknames. I would say that Whizzer White is also a great nickname too, and just sort of established as, kind of a nickname. I like that. Byron Whizzer White, the former U.S. Supreme Court justice. I did not realize he played football at Colorado. That's cool. I guess he joins Gerald Ford, as far as American history. Gerald Ford played football at Michigan. So you've got some of that in our history. Let's see what else is going on. Bill Sanders says that shrimp and grits are elite. I fully co-sign that. Total endorsement of that for me. Love it. I like when you get that, and I'm not into a bunch of sauces and things like that, but I do like the really cheesy. We said before that I want thick grits. I like viscous grits, but I also like that little tomatoey sauce that kind of gets on the grits. And the shrimp and grits, you kind of have a little tomato base that goes on top of the shrimp and the grits. I really like that a lot. I could go for that. One of my favorite things. Really good stuff. Let me go back to DawgNation.com for a minute. Garrison Tucker says, who do you believe can contain running quarterbacks the best on defense this season? Well, I think that when you look at your inside linebackers, all those guys are going to run incredibly well side to side. It seems like, though, the issue that Georgia's had also is, and I'm not football smart enough to tell you why this is necessarily, really not. But, for a couple of years now, they've had that issue with sort of outside contain, I guess you want to call it that way, where teams have had just more success with outside runs on Georgia than we're used to seeing. So hopefully by, bringing in Mendoza and the continued development of Q Johnson, the emergence of a guy like Gabe Harris, hopefully Georgia's just ready to be a little better at that spot now. I think that's probably pretty important. Hopefully that's the case. Because that, to me, sort of seemed to be the issue, that Georgia just has given up a lot of outside runs, both to quarterbacks and traditional running backs. 30th in America in rushing yards allowed in 2023, 36th in America in 2024. And, that's not terrible numbers. That's still, basically 80th percentile, 75th, 80th percentile for America. But it's not a Georgia standard, though. Not a Georgia standard. UJ Marine says you got to spy on with CJ or another linebacker. He says, think about the arch play where Walker got it in the open field. And listen, this is one of those things of, if y'all go digging deep on this, there are some old like coaching clinic videos of Kirby Smart where he talks about spying a quarterback, and it's really pretty good stuff. And I think we've played the clip going back years ago. I've lost some of my old clips. I don't think I have this one anymore. But Smart kind of takes a little bit of a dim view at the so-called spying a quarterback. Doesn't mean that Georgia never does it, but I think that Kirby would say that's sort of an oversimplification of terms, because in the just the simplest way of saying it, if you do truly have a quarterback spy, you're only playing with 10. And that's obviously, a huge issue. I'd say that Georgia also, in some of its spy-type activities, it's not always an inside linebacker. In fact, there was at least one game a couple of years ago where it looked to me like Georgia was spying quarterback with Devontae Wyatt. I'll always say that Wyatt is probably the most underrated athlete to come through Georgia, just because guys like Trayvon Walker and Jordan Davis overshadow. By the way, shout out to Devontae. Just got his 5th year picked up by the Green Bay Packers. And that's no small thing. That's like $13 million. Like, Devontae Wyatt had a $13 million Wednesday. That's a pretty good day for him. But the point is, there was at least one game a couple of years ago, it looked like Devontae Wyatt was spying the quarterback. They also do this thing where, I think they sort of use, two edge guys to kind of function as both a pass rusher and a spy, depending on where the quarterback's field of vision is. But the honest truth is, a lot of that goes over my head pretty quick. Garrison Tucker thinks that Arch Manning won't run very much this year. I mean, I do get that. And we sometimes do see some quarterbacks, run less than they otherwise could. And maybe we'll see a version of that with Gunnar Stockton this year. But if you tell me that Manning does not run at least a decent amount for Texas this year, I do think that's not his highest and best use. That Manning, in my mind, is the far better athlete of the Manning quarterback. I don't think that Peyton or Eli were as good a natural athlete as Arch appears to be. Now, they were also, very accomplished throwers, and that's the most important part. But I would say that Manning, now Archie Manning's before my time, but Archie probably the best, runner of the Manning quarterbacks thus far. But Arch seems like, to my mind, just sort of knee-jerk reaction, a better athlete than either Peyton or Eli. Let's see what else. We got to get ready to go here in a minute. DT says that UGA stated $20 million for the NIL for the upcoming year. So I believe that's so like I said, y'all check my math on this. There's a chance I'm wrong, but the $20 million is the total revenue sharing payment, which is shared among all programs. I think we've been told that like $14 million of that, 13 or 14 million, goes to football. But Georgia ain't buying a football roster for $13 or $14 million. It's got to be upwards of what a team like Texas is spending. Otherwise, Georgia wouldn't. Georgia's not losing anybody to the transfer portal right now. They're not keeping these players for free. They're just not. And they are in line for the Cantwells and the Curtises and the everybody else's. You're just not getting that kind of roster without a pretty good level of expenditure. So we said this with Terrence, and I don't want to get into like economics, and I certainly want to get into politics, but, oftentimes when money is introduced into a market, it's just inflationary. Think about like down payment assistance. Anytime like you sort of pump money into a market, all you're doing is raising the price of the good that you're pumping the money into. Different topic for a completely different show, but perhaps you've had your own experience with that. I would say that the revenue sharing payment that has come into college football, for the most part, acts as an inflationary thing for college football payrolls. That if $25 million bought you a national championship a year ago, it's probably more like a 35 or a 40 type $1 million proposition here right now. So on top of whatever Georgia's spending from its revenue sharing, it's probably spending at least as much as it spent on NIL a year ago. It may be spending more. That is my guess, but I'm also perhaps wrong. Georgia's just very quiet about stuff like this. I think that a team like Texas kind of likes to brag about it. I think they do. It kind of reminds me of we got a bunch of Texans that watch our show. Like going back years ago when Alex Rodriguez, this is a seminal moment in my time growing up, when A-Rod left the Mariners and we thought we were going to get him. Braves had a 10-year, $150 million contract on the table for A-Rod, which was at the time outrageous money. I mean, I think I spent a lot of the time thinking the Braves were going to get A-Rod, which would have been a massive deal. And then Tom Hicks, who owned the Rangers at the time, swooped in and paid $250 million for him. I remember thinking, what? How come you bid $100 million more than the Braves were offered? Like, I mean, why not offer 155? Like, why not offer like why did you? If the Braves were offering 150, how come you offered 250? Like, what? Like, how does that make any sense? But I think there was a thing that Hicks, I think, some of y'all maybe remember this better than I do. I think not only did he want to win it, I think he sort of liked the idea of the price being way higher than anybody else ever paid before. It's like, I don't go to a lot of, fancy restaurants anymore. I got kids. We, mostly eat, places you order from the counter. But if you ever go to like a nice steakhouse or something like that, some people like to eat there because it's expensive. It's like they don't want it to cost less, especially if you've got like, expense accounts, things like that. You want the meal to be expensive. There's a certain prestige around that. I think that Texas likes the idea that people know they may be spending $40 million in their football roster. I don't think Georgia likes the idea of anybody knowing how much they're spending. I think from Kirby Smart's perspective, I just think that if it's ever like, Georgia's spending, $8 gazillion, then it only deputizes agents to ask for even more money next time. This idea that, Georgia doesn't got two nickels to rub together. I think from Kirby's perspective, that helps them in future negotiations of, we'll see if we can dig in between the couch cushions here and see if we can find something to pay you. The constant crying of poor mouth, crying poverty constantly. We know that's probably not true, but it's probably a negotiation ploy on the part of Georgia, if we had to guess. All right, anything else? UJ Marine says Longhorns, Dallas. Yeah, a lot of those teams out there do, I think. I think there is a kind of a desire to see the spotlight and to be big. Sports on kind of a grand scale. It does seem like Texas cultivates that. It does. All right. What else before we go here? On the YouTube side of things one more time, maybe. Let's see. Johnny Surfdog says Kirby's defensive system plays a light box in order to take away the explosive plays. It's a winning formula. However, we need a Jordan Davis-type road grader. Yeah, I do agree with that. And I always butcher the guy's name, but, one of the players I'm interested in, I'm not doing this on purpose. I just, idiot. Like Nnamdi, is it Nnamdi Oboko? Is that guys like that could find some playing time for Georgia. This is what Jamal Jarrett would have had a chance to be had he stayed here. The big space eater, not necessarily a Jordan Davis first-round pick, but just sort of a big body that, to use Johnny's phrase, that does give you the freedom to kind of, put your defense back a little bit and play a little bit more light box type stuff. I think you're probably right about that. All right, this is good stuff. We got to go for now. Y'all check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com, air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised. It is basically warm weather time is here. Like I noticed this, like it's not really cool at night anymore. You know, we have that little stretch during the spring, and I always kind of like this where it's warm during the day, a little cool at night. I like to be kind of cool at night when I'm trying to sleep. Well, it's not super cool at night anymore. You can be outside at night with no need for jacket or anything like that. So we're basically in the warm weather time. That means when it really gets hot and that AC really kicks in, is yours ready? That's the old TV commercial. Do you know where your kids are right now? That was a thing at one point in time, right? Do you know if your air conditioning can make it through the summer we're about to have? Do you know that? Are you confident about that? Our friends at RS Sanders can help you out with that. And it may only cost you $99 to get your AC tuned back up to factory fresh specs. Wouldn't that be nice? Peace of mind, cool, comfortable summer. You love that. Online, rsandrews.com. Great day. If you're in Athens tonight, come say hello. I'd love to see you. And I'll see all of you back here tomorrow at 10 a.m. DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger. We will look forward to talking to you then. Have a great day, everybody.